Today, we are ranking the best and worst budget watch brands. I know, please don't sue me for the thumbnail. If you're looking for someone to sue, go after Ben or Nico, because I'm just hopping on the bandwagon here. Honestly, I'm just tired of making 50 cents a day on YouTube, so I've decided to officially sell my YouTube soul and my dignity to the algorithm and Google AdSense. Now, before we get started, of course, these are just my opinions. Any watch is a good watch if you like it and you actually wear it. So don't let my opinions sway you from buying a watch that you really want or discourage you from wearing a watch that you already own. I'm not trying to be a watch snob here or say that there's only certain brands that you can or can't buy from. Really, what I want to do here is just rank these brands based on their overall quality and heritage and history, and whether or not it's a watch that I personally would own or recommend to a friend or a family member. So with all that being said, let's get into our tier list. All right, we're going to start at the bottom of the barrel with the E tier. And let's go ahead and start with a brand that is very deserving of this bottom category. Again, in my opinion, and that is going to be Daniel Wellington. So if you don't know, Daniel Wellington is one of these brands that isn't quite as big now as it used to be, but they really exemplify the idea of overpriced and underdelivered. Think of a cheap Chinese watch that you could get from AliExpress for 10 or 15 bucks, except you slap a Daniel Wellington logo on it and list it for $200. That's kind of what we're talking about with this brand. Again, no disrespect, and some of their watches actually look pretty nice, but the quality of them is questionable at best, and the real issue is that at that price point, you can get way higher quality watches. So we're not going to spend too much time here with DW. We're just going to throw them in the E tier. All right, next up on this list is a brand you've probably never heard of before, and for good reason. This is Lige, or Lige. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. A while ago, I made a video on buying a watch from the TikTok shop, and it was a Lige watch. So instead of Daniel Wellington, where they take a cheap AliExpress watch and throw a $200 price tag on it, at least with this watch, it was actually priced appropriately. I think the thing was like $15 or $16 total with shipping. And it wasn't a horrible looking watch, but the quality was just not there. And the issue, again, even at this very low price point, is that even for under $20, there are still plenty of good watches out there. You certainly don't have quite as many options when it comes to brand selection or overall aesthetic of the watch, but even back here, I have plenty of watches that are under or right around $20 that are fantastic quality. And we'll get to those brands later on. All right, so we're gonna throw Lige down in the E tier. All right, and rounding out the E tier, I'm gonna put one more down here, and this is gonna be Michael Kors. This one shouldn't need too much explaining, and Michael Kors is, you know, a brand that makes watches, but also a representation of the fashion watch in general. So a big hallmark of these really low quality fashion brand watches is that they come from companies like Michael Kors that have a wide selection of products. Like they make handbags, they make clothing, they make shoes, and a company that has such a wide variety of products like that probably isn't a brand that you want to be buying a timepiece from. A lot of these watches might look nice to an untrained eye, but when you actually hold one in your hand and wear it on your wrist, it's pretty obvious that this is not a watch that you want to be spending a lot of money on. And again, it's tricky because some of these watches actually look okay. The problem is that a lot of these are $200 or $300 watches, and that $200 or $300 can go a lot further with other brands. So Michael Kors and all the other sort of fashion clothing brands like them is going to go down into E tier. All right, let's move up to the D tier. What are we going to put here? All right, let's go with Pagani Design. So Pagani Design, you've probably seen them before. They're actually really popular on Amazon. Like if you go to search for almost any watch, a lot of times the Pagani Design listings will come up either as a sponsored post or as a recommended post. And the reason they're popular and the reason why a lot of people buy them is because most of them, or maybe all of them, are homage watches, maybe even beyond an homage watch. An homage piece is basically when you take a really popular, usually high-end watch, and you essentially clone it almost one-to-one and just swap out the logo. Now, obviously the quality and the materials and the movement and all that stuff is completely different, but the overall look of it, if you saw it from a distance, is usually exactly identical to the watch that they're trying to replicate. So they fall into this sort of ethical and legal gray zone where they're not one-to-one replicas, where they're not illegal, but they are for sure trying to pass off as something more expensive or higher quality. Now, the only reason I'm going to put Pagani Design above the E tier is just that the actual quality of the watch isn't horrible. They're actually not horribly made, especially for the price range. They're sort of on like the higher end of the AliExpress universe, but a lot of them will actually have automatic movements and decent lume and decent water resistance. They usually have decently solid stainless steel cases and bracelets and even sapphire crystals in a lot of them. So the specs honestly aren't terrible for the, around $100 price range. The real issue with them is just that most of their designs are completely unoriginal and they're essentially homage or replica watches. That's what kind of annoys me about a lot of these brands is some of them are actually pretty good quality and pretty good price points, but they just go so far on copying other brands and other looks that they don't really have their own identity. So we're going to throw Pagani design down in the D tier. Okay, I think the only other one we're going to throw in D tier is movement. So movement, this is probably a controversial one. Some people would rather have this, below E, and some people would probably put this up in C or B tier. Movement has this long and sort of controversial history of coming in really hot with lots of paid advertising and tons of marketing around their watches. I think it was Movement that really popularized this whole idea of we're cutting out the middleman and we're going straight to consumer. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that was or still is Movement's whole angle. And they're not terrible watches, and I think they actually have made a lot of improvements in recent years. But they sort of fall into the same area of watch brands where there's a huge mismatch between the build quality of the watch and the price point that they charge. So again, the issue here with Movement for me personally is not so much that the watches are terrible. Like, they actually do have some pretty decent looking designs. And again, I think they have actually made some strides in recent years when coming out with automatic watches and some more original designs over time. But again, for me personally, when I look at Movement's collection and I'm scrolling through their watches, I just can't get to a point where I would purchase one of these, or more importantly, would recommend one of my friends or family members to buy one of these over a different brand. So for that reason, I'm going to keep them in the D tier for now. Okay, moving up to C tier, what are we going to put here? C tier is tricky because it's not absolute garbage, but it's probably also not something that I can strongly recommend. Yeah, this is tricky. I think we're going to go with... I actually don't know what to put here. I'm going to skip this one for now and go up to B tier. Okay, B tier. There's a few that pop out at me that I definitely want to put here. First one is going to be Invicta. All right, so we all probably know Invicta. Invicta is another one of these very controversial brands. There's some people that absolutely love Invicta. They're diehard fans, and they would throw this up in S tier. And then there's a lot of people like myself who think that Invicta watches just look way over the top. They're too gaudy. They're way too big, and they just look ridiculous in a lot of cases. Again, I tend to fall into that category. I would never buy one or wear one myself, but I do think there are some redeeming qualities. I think they have a very unique brand identity. Like, a lot of their watches are not trying to be something else. They're very Invicta at heart. Like, they have their own sort of crazy look to them, and some people appreciate that. Now, they definitely do dip into that homage territory from time to time. They do have a handful of models that are clearly trying to sort of pass off as something else, but they also just have their own collection of just crazy and ridiculous watches, and even though they're not for me, I think it's cool for other people. They also, for the most part, have pretty reasonable price points, although they always do this weird thing where everything is constantly on sale. Like, you'll see the original price is like $300 and then it's marked down like 90% and the watch is like 40 bucks. But they do this all the time. It's not like a special event or anything. But outside of that sort of weird marketing pricing angle, a lot of their watches are, I think, priced appropriately. Although looking through their website, they are just such a weird brand. If you go to all their watches and sort from high to low, who knew you could get an Invicta for $15,000 or $16,000? And they definitely have a handful of watches here around the $2,000 to $3,000 range. So that to me is absolutely crazy. If you're spending that kind of money on an Invicta, that's when we probably need to have an intervention. But listen, if you like the sort of crazy out there large designs of Invicta and you're going for the more affordable price range, it's not for me, it's not for a lot of people, but I'd say knock yourself out if it makes you happy. So yeah, I feel pretty good putting Invicta in the B tier. All right, next up, I want to put Fossil somewhere, and I'm sort of struggling whether I want to put Fossil in the B tier or the C tier. Fossil has a little bit more of a sort of brand history than some of these other ones, so it makes me want to put it a little bit higher. And it does have a very solid fan base and sort of brand identity. Again, they're not personally watches that I would go after or would really feel comfortable recommending to most people. And they do sort of dip into that fashion brand territory. I had a Fossil watch a long time ago, and it just sort of had that cheap, jangly feeling to it. It's so hard to describe because it was one of my first watches, so I didn't really know what I was looking for or what qualities a good watch had versus a bad watch. But it's just so clear the difference once you hold a really high quality watch at even a similar price point, how different it is from a cheaper fashion watch. Fossil's catalog is just sort of all over the place. They just make a whole variety of kind of random watches, but they are one of those brands that I think has gotten a lot of people into wearing wristwatches. Again, for me, I had one of these as one of my first watches, and I think that's probably the case for a lot of people. It's a more well-known name. So Fossil, yeah, I'm still sort of struggling between putting it between C and B, but let's give it the benefit of the doubt. Let's put it in B for right now. Okay, there's one more sleeper pick. This one I also could potentially move down to C, but I actually recently got one of these watches and it sort of blew me away with its quality for the price point. And that is going to be Addy's Dive. So I recently picked up the Addy's Dive Sand Dune watch. So this is a watch with a mecha quartz movement, so it almost looks like an automatic watch in the way that it ticks. And it's got this really cool, unique sand dune dial. It's got a stainless steel bracelet, it's got 100 meters of water resistance, and I believe it has a sapphire crystal. But great water resistance. It's got a screw down crown. I swim with this thing all the time. The dial's really interesting. It's got these applied indices and nicely polished hands. And just the overall quality and finishing of this watch is pretty remarkable given the price point. Yeah, I paid less than $75 for this, and it's actually selling right now for $66 on Amazon, this exact version. I'll leave an Amazon link down below in the description if you want to check this out. But yeah, to me, Addy's Dive and this watch specifically still falls into sort of that AliExpress territory. Like, it's still a cheap Chinese watch, but I think it punches way above its price point. Now, obviously this model in particular does sort of dip into that homage territory. Like, it obviously does sort of resemble a Rolex Oyster Perpetual, but I do think it has enough of its own identity with the logo and the sand dune dial to make it feel like its own thing. So maybe a controversial take because it's still sort of a cheap Chinese watch, but I'm gonna go ahead and put Addy's Dive in the B tier. I think for the money, it's still way better than anything you can get below it on this tier list. And honestly, it's hard because now comparing that to Fossil, like if I had to get another watch right now, I would for sure go with another Addy's Dive watch instead of another Fossil watch. And if someone was really on a budget and they were asking me for a watch that was under $100 but still high quality, and they still wanted this sort of sporty stainless steel type of watch, Addy's Dive might be one of my first recommendations for that person, which I know it might sound kind of crazy, but I've just been pretty blown away by this watch. And no, I am not paid by Addy's Dive. I bought this thing with my own cash. All right, we're going up to the A tier. So this is the tier where I would start feeling very confident recommending this to someone as just a general brand of watch. So if I was unable to tell people specifically which watches I would prefer or which ones I would go for, I just had to give them a brand name, they're going to be either in this A tier or the S tier. All right, first one, what should we put here? I'm going to go with Timex. I love Timex. Some people might put Timex lower. Some people might put it higher. I think it's a really solid brand, and most of their watches are very good for the money. They do have some weird outliers. They make some very strange watches from time to time, but I think in general, they have an awesome history, and in recent history, they've been making some really cool watches. I think they're actually making sort of a comeback in the affordable watch world. I think they've sort of struggled to find their identity for a while. They've gone the really cheap route and the sort of weird, almost like Invicta style watches for a while, but I think they're starting to find kind of the sweet spot and figure out what their lane really is. Actually, the watch I'm wearing right now is my Timex Q chronograph. I love this watch and I recommend it all the time, and I think this is another one of those watches that is really just punching above its price point. The quality and finishing on it is pretty fantastic for a chronograph in this range. And again, even though a watch like this might be sort of reminiscent of a Rolex Daytona, I still think a watch like this with the big bold Q and Timex at the top isn't really trying to pass off as a different watch or fall into that homage territory. It's still got enough of its own brand uniqueness and identity to feel like it's its own thing. So Timex, I think I'm going to keep up in the A tier, although of the remaining brands that we have here, it probably is the brand that I would have to be most selective with when actually picking out a watch under this brand. All right, what do we got left? We got Seiko, Casio, Orient, Tissot, and Citizen. Let's go with Citizen. I feel like I can confidently put that in the A tier. All right, so Citizen, I think that's our first Japanese brand that we're going over here. Great brand, a lot of history. They make really high quality watches. Citizen definitely has its own solid brand identity and series of watches that you can't really find anywhere else. The watch that instantly comes to mind when I think of this is the Citizen Toyosa. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. I'll put the spelling here, especially with their more recent releases of the Toyosa Small Seconds. This is a watch I really want in my collection. I just think it's such a well put together and thought out design. Got the integrated bracelet. They have a bunch of different dial variations, all with these very cool textures on them. A lot of cool colors. The applied indices look awesome. And then you have that little small seconds down at the 6 o'clock. And again, the big thing here is the quality to price point ratio. You can pick up a Toyosa. I always feel like I'm saying that wrong. Toyosa. You can pick one of these up for $200 to $400, depending on if you go with one of the standard models or the small seconds. So let's call it like $300. And again, when we look at our tier list, way down in the D and E section, there are a lot of brands that sell watches at or above this price point, and they just can't compete on the quality or the finishing or the heritage or the materials. So that is really the difference between a D or E tier and an A tier. A tier with Citizen, we have a well-respected, well-trusted brand that makes fantastic watches for the price point. So I feel very confident keeping Citizen in the A tier. All right, let's see. I think I want to put one more in the A tier, and I think that is going to be Tissot. Again, maybe a controversial take here. I don't know. Some people might put this up in the S tier. They're the only Swiss watchmaker on this list, but at least in my mind, I sort of put Tissot and Citizen in kind of the same box. Very high quality watches for the price point, good brand history, good finishing, good materials. You get a lot of bang for your buck when it comes to Tissot. And there's just some really iconic watches that have come out of Tissot, like the PRX, the Gentleman, and the Le Loc collection. I don't know. I really like Tissot. I think they have their own lane really well established, and they just make a great watch. I think the only reason I'm not going to put them in S tier is maybe just because of the price point. Some of their watches do dip into that higher end of what I would consider the affordable watch brands, which usually when I'm thinking of that, I'm thinking, you know, sub $1,000. And they definitely do make a ton of watches below that price point. But at least compared to the rest of the brands on this list, they are pushing the higher end of that spectrum. So I think for now, we'll keep Tissot in that tier, but I could be convinced to move it up. Okay, let's get our last three brands on the board. All right, let's start with Casio. A lot of you might be here because you are ready to defend Casio from me putting it lower in the tier list, which again, I apologize for the clickbait, but don't worry, I'm a Casio lover. My shelf is filled with Casios back there. So let's put Casio in its rightful place up in the S tier. I don't think I need to explain this one too much. Casio is so well loved by watch enthusiasts. For a lot of people, it's their first watch. It's their entry into this hobby. They make something for just about everyone, and they make everything at such a reasonable price point. I mean, so many of their watches are like right around 20 bucks, and they're watches that will probably last your entire life. It's just crazy the quality and the durability that you can get out of a watch when you just know which brand to go for over the other ones. It's not just a game of buying the most expensive watch. It's choosing the one that's the best made and has the best history. And Casio for sure checks those boxes. And Casio still holds the crown of selling the most sold watch in human history, which is the Casio F91W. Fantastic little watch for like 15 to 20 bucks. So just super affordable, reliable, and iconic. I don't think I can come up with a single bad thing to say about Casio, so we're just gonna leave them alone up in the S tier. All right, last up, we got our two sister brands, Seiko and Orient. These are two fantastic Japanese brands that, again, I think compete way above their price point. For a lot of people, myself included, these brands are sort of the entry point into the world of automatic watches and higher watchmaking. For me, the Seiko 5 was my first automatic watch, and it just got me fascinated with the idea of having this little machine on my wrist that was self-powered by my own movement, and somehow was able to just keep time by me walking. I just thought that was so cool, and it really got me hooked on the hobby at a young age. Seiko has a lot of classic timeless watch collections like the Seiko 5 series, the Cocktail Times, and the Turtles. And Orient has what I would consider to be one of the, if not the best dress watch at this price point, the Orient Bambino. Just such a good watch for the money, and this is one of those watches that's just so easy to recommend to people. Like if someone comes to me asking for a recommendation on a dress watch, if I just had to give them a point blank recommendation without asking any other questions, it would for sure be the Orient Bambino. And yet again, the huge key factor here is that you can pick one of these up for $150 to $250, which in a lot of cases is a much lower price point than a lot of these other sort of fashion watch brands. But you're getting a watch that's like 100 times better. So because of the price point, because of the quality, the finishing, the movements, and the overall brand heritage and story, Orient and Seiko are both going up into S tier. All right, I'm still feeling weird that the C tier has nothing in there, but I think after talking myself through some of these S and A tier brands, I feel better putting something like Fossil down in the C tier. Because again, it really comes down to if you or a friend had this chunk of money that they were looking to put towards a watch, could I confidently recommend that brand? And honestly, for me, I can't see myself really ever recommending someone to get a Fossil watch, so I feel better putting that down in the C range. All right, that's it. Let me know what you think down in the comments, how you would rearrange this list if you were making your own tier list, or if there's any other brands that I should have included in this list that I could use for a future video. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date with all things watch collecting, and I will see you in the next video.